All right, welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but to provide a platform to amplify their voice and share their stories to a more accessible world. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Tyler Garner and his father, Doug Garner. Tyler is a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Kinesiology at the University of Texas at Arlington, as well as an adaptive athlete himself, competing in sports from wheelchair basketball to triathlon. Doug, and I'm sure I'm underselling your qualifications and accomplishments, but I hope we'll address some of them throughout the episode. But he is a longtime coach of UTA's wheelchair basketball program and has contributed significantly to the growth and recognition of wheelchair basketball globally. Tyler and Doug, thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having us.
So Tyler's co-authoring and helping us with our spina bifida and upper extremity health and manual wheelchair users courses for our AdaptX education platform, two topics that he has both lived experience and professional expertise in. So very much appreciate your contribution to those. I'd love to maybe go back to childhood to a degree and start with your family dynamics and the impact that sports, specifically adaptive sports, has played for your family. Tyler, you've been a lifelong athlete, and Doug, you've been a longtime coach. Doug, did you get into parasports because of Tyler, or did it come more so as a result of his participation?
Well, I got involved in the parasports side. We had a gymnastics training center, my wife and I did, and then Tyler was born, and it took us a couple years before it hit us, like, what's he going to do when he grows up? What's out there? And this is in he was born in a few years ago, but this is around 1990, and so we really made it a emphasis to make sure that he had some things he could do for fitness and also for inclusion in the community and in the schools and with his friends. So, I started a wheelchair basketball program, and one of our friends was the head of the Arkansas Spinal Cord Commission. And this is right around the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, coming along, and she kind of helped us along the way with things that we should be doing to kind of push the envelope a little bit, and also not just Tyler, but try to help do some things for other kids in Arkansas. We started some weekend sports programs and started a junior wheelchair basketball team down there. And the Arkansas Razorbacks were very big at that time in the National Wheelchair Basketball Association. So we got to go practice where they were practicing, and they were great role models. And we kind of went from there.
Tyler, what are kind of your early memories of introduction to sports?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that my experience is pretty atypical of a lot of kids with disabilities in that I felt like I had a pretty typical childhood in terms of opportunities to participate in sport, and that is 100% due to the advocacy that my parents put in when I was young. I remember a 1 mile fun run in our hometown of Hot Springs, Arkansas, and my parents asking my brother, "Do you want to do this 1 mile fun run?" And he said, yeah, he wanted to do it, and I said, well, I wanted to do it too. And that was kind of a light bulb moment, I think, for our whole family, that I wanted to participate in these opportunities that my brother was going to have as he got older. I think we were 4 and 5 or 5 and 6 at the time.
Yeah, 4 and 5.
Yeah, 4. So my brother was 4 and I was 5, and he's getting that age where he is starting to do sports like t-ball and running races and things like that. And I wanted to do things like that as well. So that was kind of a light bulb moment for our family. And we really hit the ground running in terms of looking for and when we couldn't find them, creating opportunities for me to participate in sport. And so I say I had a pretty normal childhood in that I had opportunities to participate in sport. A lot of kids with disabilities don't have those opportunities, either because they live in an area where opportunities don't exist, or their parents don't know what they don't know, and they don't know where to look for opportunities. They don't know how to create opportunities. I'm very fortunate that I had very industrious and motivated parents who, when they couldn't find opportunities in small town Arkansas, they went ahead and created them. And it's had a rippling effect across the disabled sport world over the last coming up on 40 years now.
And you got to remember, this is 1990, really before the explosion of the internet and the explosion of Google, and just turn on the computer and you can find it. So
Right.
it did take some digging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that story is unique when referencing back to the late 90s or early 90s, and between the ADA and just the evolution of adaptive sports and inclusion as a whole. I would assume that yours is more so the exception than the expectation. But was your participation ever met with any restriction or reservation from coaches or race directors?
I would say yes, especially in my schools. I started playing wheelchair basketball early, and my high school obviously didn't have a wheelchair basketball team, and so the next best thing was to designate a time for me to practice when the high school basketball team was practicing. And there was a lot of reservations among, the coaching staff and things like that, and the administrators, just because they didn't know. I think once it got going and once I was able to do it, they saw that it wasn't a big deal, and they were open to me doing it. But there were definitely some raised eyebrows when we started trying to get me involved in opportunities in my school district.
Yeah. Doug, do you remember anything specifically, like whether you had to kind of more aggressively advocate than other times?
Yeah, he could probably answer that better than I
School?
can. He's the one who had to actually do the advocacy.
At the school or
Yeah.
in general? I think a lot of it is A, that it was very early ADA, and B, I think they had to question, well, if we let him do this, then what are other people going to want to do? Where's that line where, okay, if you meet this requirement, then we're going to be able to do this? But his school was very good. We contacted them, the superintendent, and said, hey, you spend a lot of money providing sport opportunities for your students, but none of that trickles down to students with disability, which there weren't very many. Could you figure, like, what's your annual budget per student and donate that to his wheelchair basketball team? And they did. So yeah, it was a lot of advocating, and then outside the school, a lot of advocating, because at the time there weren't a lot of adults in our area who participated in mostly races, but also like in triathlon, for example. I happened to read about Iron Kids Bread Triathlon Series, which was really cool at the time. So we entered, and you have to have equipment, you have to have a racing chair, you have to have a hand cycle. So we had to find some equipment either through grants or credit cards, and then the first race we entered, we called them and said, hey, we sent an entry for Tyler Garner. And they said, oh, we see that. And I said, well, I just wanted you to know he's in a wheelchair. I'll be with him, because we had done some local in Dallas kids events. I said, I'll be his handler in the equipment space, and kind of knew our way around a little. And they said, oh, well, we've never had anybody in a wheelchair. I don't know if he could, there's some curves on the course. And so we had to convince them to allow him to come in. And then after that, I didn't let any of the other race series, the triathlon Iron Kids Bread series, know, because you just get tired of getting past the no,
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to get past it when you're there.
Yeah. As running for the Hoyts and pushing a wheelchair in marathons, we have had a couple of races turn us away, and the justification's like, oh, well, there's too steep of a downhill, it's not safe. And I'm like, well, if I compare the elevation profile to all these other races we've run, like, that's nothing. Like, you should kind of allow the individual to determine what's accessible and safe for them. Obviously, I understand the reservations, and people don't know what they don't know, but I guess the more visibility it gets and the more frequency they're exposed to these different athletes and adaptive athletes, the more likely they are. Tyler, going through middle school, high school, did sports play a large role, I guess, in the social dynamics of childhood and kind of you coming to grips with your disability and your differences?
Huge. Huge, definitely. And I think because I had so many opportunities so early that my my identity as a person with a disability was a very small part of my identity. I was a kid. I was a middle school kid. I was a high school kid. I was a basketball player. I was an athlete, and I just happened to be all of those things as a person with a disability. Um, and because I was the only one in my hometown, it was a pretty big deal. At whenever I would do things at in my school, all my friends, would keep up with. This was when people still read the newspaper. Would keep up with the things that we were doing, and so I had a lot of support in my community, which was really really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And at what point did you decide, because you have several degrees in exercise science and kinesiology, a master's and a PhD, at what point did you decide that that's the path you want to pursue? And I guess what attracted you to that?
That is a great question. So it's my sophomore year of college, and full disclosure, I was not the best undergraduate student. And I didn't take my first couple of years of college as seriously as I should have. And so I'm looking for majors, and I see exercise science, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. That sounds like something I could do. I've been active my whole life, and so I kind of fell into exercise science, and I graduated with my bachelor's, and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I graduated, because that's a unique space as a person with a as exercise science is a unique space as a person with a disability. I would apply for jobs in fitness centers and things like that, and it never quite felt right. Um, I would get interviews and things like that, but it never really felt like I belonged there as a working professional. And so I went back and got my master's, and um, still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that I loved the area that I lived in. I knew I loved UTA. And so I started looking for jobs at UTA. And I got a job as an academic advisor. And so I did that for a year, working with incoming freshmen and transfer students. And after that year, the advising position in my department, the department that I graduated from, opened up. But it was a faculty advising position. Um, and since I had my master's degree, I qualified for a faculty position. And so for the first couple of years, my workload was primarily advising. And I'm a pretty motivated and driven person. And so I kept looking for opportunities within the department to grow. And so I approached my chair about teaching opportunities. And so my teaching opportunities grew from there. And then we developed a PhD program in 2015. And so I started that in 2015 and finished in 2020. And now my primary job is teaching, and I still work with our advisors as kind of a go-between between the department and the advisors. And so things have worked really well for me.
What has it been like being a professor at a university with a disability? I'm sure you're the exception within your colleagues. Do you feel like your students respond any differently to you?
It's interesting. There's actually one other faculty member in my department who is in a wheelchair, and he played on the wheelchair basketball team at UTA quite a while ago. When did Abu play? Back in the
Actually,
80s?
before there was a team at UTA, he played in
Oh,
the
really?
community team. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So he
Early
predates.
80s.
Yeah, he predates the moving Mavs at UTA, but he's another faculty member in a wheelchair. And I've actually had a couple of students comment on that. One of the students said, "There sure are a lot of people in wheelchairs around here." I didn't really know what to say to that, so I
Yeah.
kept on with the conversation. But my students don't treat me any different. Maybe they think some things, but I'm good at what I do, and I'm good with the students. And so I think any thoughts that they have about me as a person with a disability are kind of pushed to the side as soon as they get to know me and get to know what I do and who I am. Um, but it's never been an issue for me. It's never been a problem for me. But UTA is at the forefront in terms of accessibility. We have a disability employee network, and there's been a lot of initiatives to improve accessibility for faculty, staff, and students on campus for as long as I've been there. It's always been a priority. So maybe my experience is the exception, but I've had great experiences.
Is your area of interest within exercise science related to disability or more so related to quote unquote non-disabled?
Yeah, it definitely definitely interested in exercise science as it relates to people with disability and exercise science in general, but exercise science specifically as it relates to people with disability. My
Yeah, so it's
dissertation, yeah, oh, I'm sorry. My dissertation was on the biomechanics of wheelchair propulsion.
yeah, that's what I was hoping to dive into a little bit because it's the topic that you'll be helping us with for the course. But so you have in the nutritional space as well, correct?
Mhm.
Some courses. So activity levels for wheelchair users. If you look at the literature, it's going to paint a pretty bleak picture. Not as active as their peers. A host of co-occurring health conditions. What have you learned about nutrition for manual wheelchair users, physical activity for manual wheelchair users? Maybe that's too vague of a question, but maybe we'll start with nutrition. So, how would you approach nutrition for someone with a physical disability that uses a wheelchair?
Yeah, so to answer that, we need to think about two things. We need to think about energy needs of an individual and what factors contribute to those energy needs. And then we need to think about uh, activity levels of those individuals and what goes into those activity levels. So let's start with the energy needs piece, right? We have our basal metabolic rate, which is the energy needs that we need to maintain our bodily processes at rest. And that's primarily the function of our organs, our heart, our lungs, our liver, kidneys, things like that, our brain. But it also includes muscle mass. So lean tissue and the maintenance of lean tissue. And so generally speaking, the more lean tissue you have, the higher your basal metabolic rate is going to be. For an individual with a disability who uses a wheelchair specifically, they're going to have less, on average, they're going to have less skeletal muscle mass just by nature of not using their lower body, right? And our legs are our biggest muscle groups in our body. And so that's a significant portion of energy that we're not able to utilize. And so that influences basal metabolic rate significantly. I'll give you an anecdotal example. We have our exercise science lab at UTA, and we can actually measure resting metabolic rate. So I was curious what mine would look like. And so you've heard of the prediction equations where you plug your height, your weight, and your age into those prediction equations, and it gives you an estimate of how many calories you would need to maintain your weight per day, right? So I plugged my information into one of those prediction equations, and it gave me about 1,700 calories. And so I went to the lab, and I had my basal metabolic rate measured in the lab, and it came out to 1,400 calories. My basal metabolic rate, or resting metabolic rate, was about 1,400 calories. And so if I had used the prediction equation, I would be overconsuming by about 300 calories. And that's we know that obesity is a huge issue in the disabled population. It's about 50% higher than the general population. And obesity in the general population is already not good. So I think nutrition education plays a huge role in it. We just don't have enough information about how being a wheelchair user influences energy needs. It's hard to study. It requires large populations. And so it's an understudied area. And then the second piece is the physical activity piece. Even the most sedentary, able-bodied person is still moving around. They're getting up to go to the bathroom. They're getting up to, go to the kitchen, make a sandwich, whatever. Manual wheelchair propulsion is much more energy efficient than walking. And so our activities of daily living in general are more energy efficient. Pushing across campus, I take significantly less pushes than somebody would take steps if they're walking, right? So the activity factors that we utilize when trying to determine energy needs are not going to be applicable to a wheelchair user. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so the dissertation on wheelchair propulsion, did it look at metabolic cost of propulsion or did it look at injury risk in upper extremities or?
It did not. I wish I could have done that, but it did not. I was looking at how manual wheelchair users bring their wheelchair to a stop. So there's a lot of research on propulsion mechanics, but there's very little work done on braking. So bringing the wheelchair to a stop, right? And specifically, I was interested in how wheelchair users of different functional capacities were able to bring their wheelchair to a stop. How does somebody with a high-level spinal cord injury, well, let me back up. We've all heard the law of physics. Every object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an external force. So how does somebody with a high-level spinal cord injury who has no access to their ab muscles or their core muscles, how are they going to bring their wheelchair to a stop without falling forward, right? Because we know that people do it. So I was interested in the positioning mechanics, the movement mechanics, and how wheelchair users of different functional abilities bring their wheelchairs to a stop without falling over.
And what did you learn?
Yeah, so somebody with a higher spinal cord injury is going to utilize their head a lot more to shift their center of mass. So they're going to bring their head back to try to remain upright. They're going to operate at a slower speed generally. They might use their hands to hold on to the frame of their wheelchair if they feel like they're going to fall over.
Yeah. And if you look at the literature anywhere, some of the papers cite anywhere up to 95% of manual wheelchair users are going to experience some sort of rotator cuff pathology or some sort of shoulder injury. Do you think that's... I don't know if I accept the notion that it's purely because of wheelchair propulsion. I'm sure it's multifaceted. Like, do you think it's more so due or maybe an equal contribution to those activity levels and just individuals with mobility disabilities being more sedentary than their peers?
You know what? I had this conversation a couple months ago, actually, with somebody who works. He does disability mechanics, biomechanics at another institution, and I agree with you. I don't think I accept that wheelchair propulsion is inherently bad for the shoulders. I think a bigger contributor is the fact that all we're doing is working in the anterior. Wheelchair users are notoriously bad about shoulder health and specifically working the posterior muscles, those the trap and the rotator cuff muscles that help stabilize the shoulder. The same thing could be said for walking, right?
Yeah.
Walking has the risk of doing damage to your knees, but there are things that you can do to strengthen the muscles that mitigate that damage, right? We don't use that as a reason to tell people not to walk. And so
Yeah,
I don't think,
exactly. Yeah, that's the piece I think that feels like it's missing to me is like
Yeah.
you can't tell someone who uses a wheelchair like, oh, just ambulate less,
Right.
propel yourself less. Like that's not an acceptable answer. But it's maybe akin to saying someone who is able to walk, who's never run a mile before, and then asking them to go run a 5K every day. Like maybe the physical ability of the wheelchair user doesn't match the demand
Sure.
of propulsion or the frequency and intensity in which they're being required to propel. So maybe if they raise the ceiling of their fitness levels, the action of manual propulsion wouldn't be quite as straining or strenuous.
Another aspect of that is the equipment. And it's very difficult to get the right equipment and the right fit to maximize the potential of the person in the chair and also
fit and positioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everywhere from like where the axle is positioned on the chair to the other components of where it sits in relation to your center of mass and stuff.
Yep.
And if it's not set up right, they're set up for failure because they're having to use the wrong position of the arms and also the wrong push.
Yep.
When you guys take a new athlete, do you go through a process like that to see like whether their sport chair is a good fit for them?
Yeah, actually that begins in the recruiting stage. Like if we recruit this athlete, what are we going to need to do as far as equipment? Is it too wide? Is it too narrow? Are his knees too high? Is his backrest? We go through all that, and we work really closely with the Performex wheelchairs, and they help us match the athlete to the equipment and help them maximize their potential based on their disability level.
Yeah, just like you would with an able-bodied athlete, there's a movement analysis that you do to kind of look at how they move and how certain chair setups can maximize the function that they do have.
We are grateful for the support of our first show sponsor. Resolution Fitness offers leading brand health club equipment and accessories for residential and commercial use. In addition to traditional exercise equipment, they specialize in adaptive fitness products and wheelchair accessible machines. If you're interested in outfitting your fitness facility or home gym to be more accessible, visit www.resolutionfitness.ca or the link in the show notes below. Do you think the increased publicity and coverage from the Paralympics this year and hopefully in subsequent years is going to make parasport, adaptive sport more commonplace? And do you think there's a path to parasport getting more sponsorship and becoming a career in the same way that able-bodied sports is?
Well, I think there's a lot of great changes going on, and the success and the visibility of the Olympics and Paralympics certainly helps recognition for people with disabilities. So I think it also brings into play the my dog's disagreeing with me, the sciences, and actually having those subject matter experts who are interested in helping those athletes maximize what they can do. So it's the economic side for sure, and the sponsorship side, but also the work that the U.S. Olympic Paralympic Committee has done to be inclusive in their programming is also a great part of the success.
I think we can't discount also the role of social media and exposure to adapted sports. You've got people like Matt Scott who are, really blowing up on Instagram. People like Zach Rule, who I don't know if you know who Zach Rule is.
Sled hockey.
Sled hockey, and this massive jacked fella, but he's doing all sorts of. He's going viral for doing crazy things on an escalator, right? And so social media has increased exposure in a way that we haven't seen ever before in para sport, and that's only just in the last 10 years probably.
Yeah, I think it was even last week. Chuck Aoki from the wheelchair rugby team, who was a guest on our show a few months ago, they're launching a media company related to Paralympics specifically. So getting those athletes more exposure and kind of rewriting the narrative on inclusion in sports. And I know, Doug, some of the articles I had read when I was prepping for this episode, you kind of talk about that, how you were really passionate about para sports being perceived on the same level as varsity sports at the university level and not just on an intramural basis. Have you seen the landscape change over the last 15 years in the university setting?
Yes, I have in a lot of ways, as far as inclusion and the talk around inclusion and diversity. And I think it's building to that point where adapted sports teams will be considered at the same level as the varsity teams. I mean, that's still the battle, and it's still not like building and they will come. You have to still go out every day and sell it and sell why the value of the sport and why it's important to provide that, because we're looking at not just the opportunity, but where that opportunity leads as far as in education, opportunities in the professional world, and the things that education can bring to the lives of anybody.
What do you think are the primary barriers to more universities adopting adaptive sports programs? Is it lack of coaching? Is it lack of funding?
Well, yeah, that's a great point, because it is so new. There aren't any coaching preparation courses out there. There's those athletes who've grown up in the sport and bring that background and experience to coaching. But as you know, coaching isn't just the X's and O's, but it's the whole package of of what it takes to help your athletes realize their potential. So that's a great point. And as far as the economic side, we're seeing that growing. As far be politically correct here, as the universities go, of course they have to look at budgets and they have to look at the value of the money for the students. But yes, it's growing. It grew a lot while I was in there, and I think it's. We started a women's team. There's other schools that are starting other sports programs, so it's just slow. It's just slow.
Tyler, the first time I read about you, was it 2019 that you did the Ironman in California?
No, 2023. I did it last year.
Oh, okay. Did you attempt an Ironman several years prior, or
I
no?
I think I did the half Ironman in
Okay.
2019. That sounds right.
So maybe it was more recent, but so I guess for people who aren't familiar, you did complete Ironman California, I guess last year.
Yep.
What was that preparation like?
Oh, it was intense. Ironman preparation is at least a part-time job. I was training 12 to 16 hours a week, which, as a full-time working professional, a full-time dad, and a full-time husband, it's hard. My family was incredibly supportive. My wife was amazing at helping me make sure that I was prioritizing my training, because we both knew that if I couldn't train in the way that I needed to, then I might as well not even go. Ironman isn't something that you can just decide you want to do on a whim, especially as a person with a disability. It's something that you have to put the time in and put the work in.
Yeah.
So I signed up and started training in December of 22, and got almost a full year of training. I was already had a good baseline level of fitness, and so at that point it was just focusing on discipline specific training, swimming, biking, and getting in my racing chair.
How did you complete each modality? So was it hand cycle for the bike and then push rim for the run?
Correct. Yeah. I used a racing chair for the run and a hand cycle for the bike.
And you picked California specifically because you felt like it had a more accessible course? Is that one of the reasons?
Partially, and partially because it was one of the only options. Not every Ironman race is hand cycle approved, and so California was really the only one that I could do that fit within the timeline that I wanted to do. And the course was conducive to my goals. It's a pretty flat course. That doesn't mean that it wasn't windy, and it rained for 6 hours out of the 13 hours I was on the course. And so
That's tough.
I'll send you some pictures, Brendan, of the pooling rain in the transition area. It was a downpour.
Yeah, and I would imagine, obviously, that's hard for anyone, but in a push rim chair, it's amplified. So I guess when you saw that forecast, did you consider not trying?
No. So the forecasts all the way up to race day were sunny and 75, all the way up, and then maybe 6 hours before I went to bed, it started to show a slight chance of rain. And then the rain forecast just increased exponentially in that time frame. So I was expecting clear skies and beautiful weather, and we did not get that.
Do you have ambitions of doing more races or goals to do more triathlons?
Maybe more triathlons in the future. Probably not more Ironmans, just because of the time commitment, and it's an expensive sport. The entry fees are expensive. The travel is expensive. The equipment's expensive. I need to get a new racing chair. I probably need to get a new hand cycle if I wanted to do another Ironman. My hand cycle is pretty old, and that stuff's not cheap.
So what about road racing?
Yeah.
What about road racing specifically?
Like I said, I need to get a new racing chair. My chair was never really a good fit for me. And so by the time I finished the marathon of the Ironman, I had uh, bruises and I was bleeding because my torso kept colliding with the frame of my chair. So that was a interesting experience. I think I still have some scars and some marks on my ribs from the race. Got some
That's
battle scars.
a good segue maybe into what you two recently co-authored and published, a book on speed and agility for wheelchair basketball athletes. And um, that probably fills a gap in the literature. I'm not sure there's been other books written about that. Was there a specific reason why you wanted to write it? Doug, you mentioned that there's not much coach education out there. Are you hoping to kind of fill some of those gaps?
Yeah, we definitely are. And there's tons of information on running, how to run, but um, and that's how kids learn about their body in PE by learning to run and skip and all those activities they do in PE. But PE teachers aren't taught how to do that for students with disabilities. And so when I was just looking at the information and thinking, how can we prepare these kids coming up at the college level for participation in sports, but also how can they just have a healthy and active life and not go to PE and be the scorekeeper or the umpire or the referee or equipment manager? And those were the stories we were hearing was a lot of non-participation type activities. So we wanted to help those. And I worked with the State Department with a global sports mentoring program, and we have emerging leaders come in and stay with us and work with us. And I had a PE teacher from Nicaragua, and he had never been exposed to that. And he said in their training programs they weren't ever exposed to that. And so not just in the U.S. but around the world, it's maybe even less exposure to disability than what we have. And so we did the book in Spanish to try to reach some of those countries as well.
Brendan, earlier you asked about the Paralympics adding some legitimacy to para sport. And I think that this was another motivation and intention behind the book was to add legitimacy to exercise science for disabled populations. There's nothing out there right now about sport science for disability.
Yeah, the Lakeshore Foundation, I believe, in Alabama just built a big sports lab, and they're hoping to advance some of that as well. But hopefully between the Paralympics and people, yeah, there's a disconnect, I feel like, between sports science and advocacy, special ed, whatever you want to call that other side. They don't like overlap.
There's research, but so far very little effort to turn that research into practical application. And so that was a big intention behind
Yeah.
what we were trying to do with the book.
And I feel like people in higher ed live in the lab space and they don't realize that some things exist in the community-based practical side of things, and they're just looking at populations as a series of subjects that have participated in an 8-week intervention, and then they're extrapolating some conclusion from that. Where we just submitted an NIH grant for an intervention on athletes with Down syndrome, like high intensity training for people with Down syndrome. And it's funny because the process of writing the grant took 6 months, and then it will take a few months to be approved, and then the IRB process. And I just joke with our research team, like, I could have ran this intervention a year ago with the 15 athletes with Down syndrome at my gym, and I could have had a conclusion a year ago and saved you a lot of time writing that grant. So I guess the gatekeeping within research and within academics sometimes kind of slows down the process.
It's easy to say that the research is out there, but not everybody knows how to read research. Not everybody knows how to be a consumer of research. And so there's a huge need for people to be able to translate the research into bite-sized take-home messages. And how do we actually apply this research to our athletes?
What do you want people to take away from the book?
Me? Hopefully that we can get the book in the schools and into the teachers, maybe through some teacher education programs or things like that, just to highlight the potential for activity and some bite-sized pieces. Like we used the book to tie into some of the video that we've done. We started doing training video in 2010, I think. Just a segue, a gateway into this is what the potential is out there, and this is how you can use your chair, and this is how you can activities that you can do for your kids, because they love to go fast. They love to get in there, even if they're in their day chair, they just love to go as fast as their friends. So that's what I really hope, is to be able to reach more people.
I'd love to see it be the spark that kind of gets more people doing things like this, getting this information out there. I'd love to see it be the spark for more people to write similar books on disability sport.
Yeah. I wonder if, since you named it specifically to wheelchair basketball, but I'm sure it has broad applications to wheelchair rugby and other para sports, like whether there should be one that's just more broad, so you don't make it exclusive to basketball, but that it could be applicable to PE curriculums and other para sports as well. So hopefully people recognize and appreciate that the takeaways are applicable to other sports as well.
Yeah, great.
Doug, at the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned that you maybe started advocating for para sports when Tyler was a year or two old, and you were wondering what he was going to do to participate. I have a 2-year-old and a 10-month-old, so now looking at where he is now, can you maybe reflect back on like what your initial reaction was to maybe having a son with a disability, the concerns that you had, and maybe how you feel now, seeing how successful he's been?
Well, when he was born, you get past the medical issues, and that's a big part of every conversation, is the medical issues. And then you go into the human potential issues, and you start looking at what's out there. And we were gymnastics coaches, and we had a children's fitness center, and it took us 4 years to figure out, well, wait a minute, we don't have any kids with disabilities, and what's he going to do? And he came to the gym quite a bit. So yeah, like anything, it's a transition in stages. And then when he got old enough, it's like, well, wait a minute, you have to have more than one person to have a basketball team. So we had to start a program to start a basketball team. And then you get the fundraising things, the fundraising component about that. And a lot of it is just not the subject matter expert parts, but just having it out there and educating parents at that time, especially parents of girls who were very hesitant in Arkansas to bring their little girls out there because they didn't want them to get hurt. And that was just something that we had to. So it was a transition and stages going there, and then seeing now, Tyler and I were talking once, and it's like parenting, and it's just putting it out there. I mean, this was like throwing the spaghetti against the wall, and it stuck for him, but maybe not for everybody. And staying aware of, okay, if it's not basketball, what other sports? I mean, he tried all the sports.
And I did not love every single one of them, but I'm glad that I tried them all.
Not a fan of tennis.
I was not a fan of tennis.
Yeah, that's funny. Tyler, you've been in and out of gyms. One question that we ask most of our guests are what can be done to make the fitness industry, gyms, clinics, etc., more accessible for people with disabilities and more inclusive?
Yeah. I think a big thing is to have staff that are educated on working with people with disabilities, because a lot of times existing equipment can be modified, or existing exercises can be modified without any changes to the equipment, but you have to have people who know how to make those modifications. And so I think having training staff and professional staff that know how to make those adaptations is an easy low-hanging fruit. Second, there are, there is equipment that you can get that is more wheelchair friendly. There's equipment that the seats can move out so that you can just put your wheelchair in there. Getting a bench press bench that's a little bit wider so that somebody with a little, more balance issues is going to be comfortable on that bench. I know that when I do bench press, I don't have the best balance, and so I'm focusing on my hips as much as I'm focusing on the barbell, and that really impacts my ability to do a bench press.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
also, as you educate these instructors, it's not just a one size fits all approach. Um, every disability is different. Every level of injury is different, and so it's not just saying, "Oh, I have a guy in a wheelchair," but everything that's involved, what level, what even the same level can have complete and incomplete. So it's a very big education process to provide the best service.
Yeah, we make it pretty clear in the courses. I think hopefully you agree, Tyler, and the ones that you've read, like that we can teach you about the diagnosis, can talk about the anatomy and the phys, but at the end of the day, each person's going to present differently. That diagnosis only tells you so much that you can't gather from just a session with the individual, trying different things with them and coming up with solutions. And like you mentioned, Tyler, like a lot of equipment can already be modified. I think a lot of gym owners and fitness professionals think that they need to retrofit their environments to make them
Yeah,
accessible, when in
yeah,
reality, you just need more creative solutions.
yeah, yeah. You guys are
So
doing really great work, and I'm excited to work with you on these courses.
yeah, hopefully it addresses, like you mentioned, that gap that there's missing professional knowledge. You see it in the adapted PE space too. Most physical education teachers just say that they don't have any pre-service training on how to support people with disabilities in their courses or in their classes. So hopefully this can begin to address that. But anything specific that you're working on now that you're excited about in the coming years?
I'm
Just
excited about getting the book out in other countries. Like I told you, I was in Peru a couple of weeks ago working a tournament. One of the other people that was on my panel was a collegiate um, PE coach and teacher. And she also, because she was involved in the para world, she also included that. And she wanted to get some books for her students because, as we've all said, there's nothing out there. So just seeing the what grows out of this and what we see in 10 or 20 years.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm part of a couple of research initiatives at UTA that are we're trying to get off the ground. I've got a student that I'm mentoring that's working on um, a wheelchair propulsion project for his honors thesis. So some pretty cool academic things going on. And then I have a 6-year-old son, and so he's doing a lot of things. He's big into rock climbing right now, and so I'm having a lot of fun watching him grow and learn what he can do and
Yeah.
discover new things.
Are you in the middle of a grant, and I don't know if you can speak on it yet, that's looking at the accessibility of buildings, gyms specifically, or disabilities
Gym
specifically?
specifically, no, I'm not.
But buildings.
Yeah, looking at. I need to check on the status of this one, but it's looking at environmental air quality control in indoor spaces for wheelchair users specifically.
Interesting.
And I
Yeah,
think
and
it's not
if oh, sorry, go
not
ahead,
just
Doug.
not just the physical inclusion, but the environment and the social inclusion that a lot of people kind of stay away from. You can make it as physically inclusive as you want, but if people aren't comfortable coming in and working out there, then that's a big part of it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, we talk about that a lot as well. That you can get into the building, but that doesn't mean that you'll be able to access all the services or even benefit from all the services. So, well, if your honors thesis student wants to take a look at the wheelchair biomechanics course and contribute to that in any way, we'd be happy to have him as well. So,
Oh,
we'll
I think
include
you'd
a
love that.
link. Yeah, we'll include a link to the book in the show notes, as well as your page, Tyler. If people want to connect with you, yeah, there's a cover, speed and agility for wheelchair basketball. But Tyler, Doug, thanks for joining me, sharing your expertise, and look forward to sharing this with our audience next week.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brendan. This was fun.
It's been great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to the AdaptX podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.